Hi, welcome to the Daiku Podcast. I'm Gary Snow. I'm once again joined by Andrew Kolb, the designer of Neverland, Oz, and now the bookend to this fantastic trilogy, Wonderland, which will be released Tuesday, November the 12th. Andrew, welcome back.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking about Wonderland and
And
also Oz and Neverland too, if it comes back to that.
well, and I have to ask, when you first started out making this fantastic series, and I have the books here, and they are like truly, they have a high spot on my shelf. And then finally, you see Wonderland here. When you first started making Neverland, did you ever think that it was going to go this route?
You can always dream. Like, I think when I started with Neverland, all I wanted to do was see if I could get that into the world, because my background in like picture books and more like children's literature meant that I was like comfortable in that space, but didn't know if RPGs was something that I could kind of really break into. So first with Neverland, all it was like, can I make this happen? And then the reception was more better than I could have ever imagined. And then once we kind of got to Oz, then I was thinking, like, after Neverland kind of was a success by my standards, then Oz and Wonderland were kind of both in the back of my mind. So those other two weren't always kind of planned, but I would say that Wonderland was also kind of buzzing around while working on Oz.
And for those that haven't seen, I have interviews with Andrew about Neverland and Oz. I'll put the links up above and in below, and you can check out those interviews and see the creative process for those games and Andrew's background in general, as far as his fantastic illustrations, which are not limited to just game designs. And Andrew, you've been doing this kind of, I don't want to say off the side of your desk, but I mean, you have like a full-time illustration career doing other things. And how do you squeeze the time in to make games?
Yeah, I mean, great question. These books are definitely the kind of greatest undertakings as far as projects are concerned, that I've kind of run into in my career. But I'm also spending most of my time drawing, so these books are kind of like a fun way to flex the like writing muscles. So how do I fit it in? I don't know, just every kind of like spare moment between projects, or I've sent sketches on a different project to a client and I've got a couple days before they'll get me notes. So time to just chip away at what I can. And then admittedly, like once, like with Neverland, once Andrews McMeel said, yes, we'd like to kind of work with you on this, then it becomes like a project I can like properly slot into my schedule and justify, because I'm going to get at least some payment out of it. But before that, it was just personal time, because it all started as a personal setting, or like a homebrew setting for my players.
And speaking of Andrews McNeil, we briefly talked about it before the interview started. I know that at some point, I don't know what the time frame was. I'm going to say like 6+ months ago, they announced that their TTRPG division is now no longer making games. But my biggest concern was, okay, what about what I thought was going to be the third book, and how did that play out as far as now Wonderland being part of their publishing house still?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak from my own perspective, and Andrews McMeel has always been very transparent with like our relationship. So I don't know if I could really speak to like the inner workings of how they've structured their business. As far as I've understood, that they've still been very receptive to publishing setting books and books like what I'm doing. I get the sense that they're maybe not pursuing like whole systems or developing new games, if that makes sense. Like, I think building off of existing systems, I think, is something that they're still receptive to, or at least that's what they've communicated with me. Like, I think they're still very much open to me kind of talking about ideas, and like when Wonderland was kind of in progress and their changes were happening, they were very adamant that like we still really support you and this book and these books, like even kind of going back to Oz and Neverland. So they were, yeah, very transparent. We want to kind of keep supporting you and your books. So that was kind of my experience. Again, yeah, I don't know what happens behind those employee doors, but I think that's I think that's the change. I don't know. Does that make sense?
That does, yeah.
Cool.
And I'm going to, like, I keep kind of saying that's like the nice bookend to the trilogy, and we'll talk maybe about future projects at the
Sure.
end, and ideas that I have for you if you haven't thought of any yourself, that I'm sure you have.
I will gladly accept and add it to the list.
So, first of all, let's get into like when you chose Wonderland. How long has the research process been going on as far as like what, just like you did for Neverland and Oz, like what you wanted to put in, ideas that kind of flowed from the base material?
Yeah, I think because I kind of had Wonderland in the back of my mind while working on Oz, I kind of recognized the pieces that fit to one setting versus the other. So I think I probably mentioned this in our previous video, but my approach with these books after Neverland was to kind of explore the different pillars of TTRPGs. So where Neverland is really kind of emphasizing exploration, and Oz is emphasizing kind of the social component. Wonderland really kind of dives into kind of like combat or conflict. So some of the things that didn't fit as well in a social setting like Oz then found its way into a kind of more conflict-driven setting like Wonderland. And similarly, I started to do research. Well, I mean, at the same time that I was researching Oz, because I was looking at Oz as a kind of a point crawl system, at the same time I was also looking into other systems and kind of digging further into specifically dungeon crawls, because that was something that I didn't know how to run and was curious about, and then realized, oh, this would be like a good fit for Wonderland, without kind of like going into too much of the structure behind Wonderland. But that's kind of the thrust of it, is it is a combat focused or conflict focused dungeon crawl. So but to answer your question, how many years or how long did the research take? I think probably it's probably a good year of kind of rereading the original books and poems, finding other books that kind of built off of the public domain story, or like public domain stories, and then watching the movies, and kind of just writing down literally everything I could think of, and figuring out what goes in and what is kind of unnecessary, or what do I need to kind of make this feel like Wonderland.
Cool. Well, I'm going to pop it up on the screen here just so that we
Great.
can kind of talk to it. And for those listening on the podcast, check it out on YouTube. That's usually where the original interview is, and you can kind of check it out. And I guess first question is red. How come you chose red? And like, as I held up the books earlier, you've got like green and like a nice baby blue, and now to red.
Yeah, so the red, I think for two reasons. One, like I think the Heart Queen and the kind of like playing cards, the black and the red always felt right, or the black. I will say black, white, and red. Like the foil is a silver foil on this one, so the black, white, and red kind of felt like playing cards and felt right. And then also because it's more conflict driven, like to not be too morbid, like the kind of blood red. Although maybe this isn't that tint, the allusion to kind of like the red and conflict and the anger. So that was the idea. And then the design is very much a riff off of playing card backs. So the framing component was a result of research into kind of playing card designs.
And you snuck the Cheshire Cat's little grin up in the sky?
I did, yeah, because the first one has the moon in Neverland, the second one has the sun over Oz. So I needed something kind of in that same spot, but I don't know. Based on the nature of it, there isn't really a sky in the same way. So what's up there? But a floating grin just felt right.
Do you, from like a design perspective, like when those things kind of click for you, how fun is that when you go, I'm gonna do that?
Yeah, I think, I mean, we're talking about the cover specifically, but this applies to the entire book, that a lot of the challenges, or a lot of the time when I'm running into a problem, I realize, oh, when it just kind of feels natural, or like, oh, this was the obvious answer all along, that's when I know that I need to pursue that and move on to the next problem, or go like, oh, yes, this is right, and then continue with that.
Cool. And I'm not going to dwell on anything in too long on the book, and it's just kind of a nice, kind of fun flip through. But there are
Great.
some areas that I do have like questions about, and I guess one right off the bat, we're flipping through the table of contents, and I'm going to get to the inside pages here on what's going on. The first question I have is, I love your illustrations. Like, it's I'm a big fan of all the work that you do, and I can't help it that you went in with this Monty Python collage aesthetic.
Yeah, I with Neverland kind of pulling off of or kind of being inspired from um, picture books, then that kind of went and skewed more towards like my familiar kind of territory with illustration. So with these books, I always try to kind of like push myself a bit. So with Oz, trying to kind of be inspired by like 1920s Art Deco art, felt right for that setting for anyone who's kind of read into that book. And then with Wonderland, I knew like the character illustrations are still very much the grayscale that you've seen in my other books, so that's consistent. But I knew I wanted to do collage. One, because I feel like you can get that kind of sense of not disconnect, but contrast that you feel when you're reading kind of a kind of a I don't want to say gonzo, but kind of a surreal setting that you can't when you're just drawing it, because that consistent style kind of makes it feel more uniform. Whereas when you're looking at those kind of old Monty Python or Terry Gilliam animations, part of the humor just comes from the fact that you've got this like baby carriage that then becomes this monster, right? So I think pulling from that kind of great quality was something that I really wanted to kind of instill in the tone and the spirit of Wonderland, because you can describe these kind of surreal elements, but visually, I think collage does a really good job of communicating that in a unique way. So yeah, I'm really glad that you would say Monty Python, because I was really trying to capture the spirit of the kind of Terry Gilliam or Gilliam animation style in this.
Well, I actually had to look it up because right away I went Monty Python, and then I had to do some research myself and go like, well, who made that, and like
Oh, great.
what's it actually called? And
And what did
because
you
I
find? How would you, what
it
would
was
you,
it was just always it went back to Terry Gilliam's as like stop motion collages, and so but I was trying to find if there's actually a name for that like particular style, and that's all it ever came up with for me.
yeah, I hadn't really considered that there's like subsets within collage. I think part of what I really like about Terry Gilliam's work is that it is a mix of existing material, like from public domain or from newspaper clippings and that, but also a really nice blend of his own illustration work too. So I also still tried to kind of keep that in mind when I was making these images of, right, I don't need to just use existing illustrations. I can also draw the clouds, or I can add elements to each illustration that kind of adds my own touch to it, but also kind of still feels kind of like that spirit of the kind of the inspiration.
And where did you get your public domain art? Do you have like were you collecting it for like the whole year leading up to like the design, or like was it kind
Yeah,
of
while writing, I would absolutely, so a range of resources. A lot of libraries and museums have great collections of, or like databases of public domain images. I'll have to check. I know the New York Public Library was one that I used a lot. There's also a Dutch library that I used a lot as well. And those were two really good resources because you can search and specifically search for like public domain or like free to use images. So those two, as well as some others, and they're escaping me now, but museums and libraries are always kind of my touchstone for finding public domain images.
cool? Let's before we get into the cast, I kind of flipped through there quickly, and I'm going to go back a few pages here when you talk about the difference. You've designed the game, which is kind of an interesting thing to have be a dungeon crawl,
Mhm.
a board crawl, or a depth crawl.
Yeah, there's kind of like three tiers to the game, and hopefully what that means is it allows a game master or a dungeon master to kind of run it as they where they're comfortable. So the dungeon crawl is kind of what you would expect from other kind of like dungeon settings where you're kind of going from room by room, and kind of going slow and methodically. The board crawl is kind of going one level up. And I usually have been using that in my kind of play testing for backtracking or chase scenes, like chances or opportunities where moving slow and methodically isn't the right fit. So how I've designed Wonderland is to kind of fit on, without kind of going into too much detail, it kind of maps onto a chessboard. So the board crawl then takes those individual rooms and kind of generalizes it into a square on a chessboard. So you can move, let's say you're chasing the white rabbit, then you can move your party around as, like, let's say the black pawn, and the white rabbit as the white pawn around the chessboard. And you still roll encounters, and time still passes, but it streamlines the process to feel a little more fluid or high stakes. So that way you're not describing each individual moment, but you're able to say, okay, when you go into this room, then this happens. Do you ignore it, or they throw a wardrobe over? Do you hop over it, or what do you do? Or what can you do if you're running? Can you try to lock the door quickly, or things like that? So that's kind of where the board crawl comes in. And then the depth crawl, which I think I've included in all of my previous books, and is directly kind of inspired by the work of Emmy Allen. Gardens of Yin specifically was kind of that first exposure to it. And that is used in spaces in Wonderland where a map doesn't really make sense. Like, I think a good example is like a hedge maze. So a hedge maze, like looking at a map, doesn't feel like you feel when you're going through a hedge maze. Like, it doesn't feel like you're kind of getting lost or turned around, and that kind of sense of confusion. Where a depth crawl, which is kind of all based on dice rolls, and the deeper you go, the more dice you roll, feels more like, oh, we're like really pushing our luck, or we're kind of risking to go deeper into this maze or deeper into this forest, and then using landmarks as the way to kind of say, oh, we've been here before, or we've rolled 3 or 4 times and we keep coming back to the same spot, which is possibly determined by random dice rolls, but can kind of also just feel like, I don't know, a frustrating experience, in the best possible way, like meant for that. So that is kind of where those 3 different systems work within Wonderland. They all kind of serve their own purpose, but also hopefully will complement a game master who wants to kind of try different things or keep things interesting for their players.
And then maybe correct me if I'm wrong. So the areas of Wonderland, so there's like Wonderland itself, the Looking Glass, Pandemonium, and then the world above, or Dinah.
Yeah.
And Dinah. And is there other areas, or like, and how did you kind of determine, like, okay, this is the way I see it? Is it from the source material? Because I'm not 100% familiar, other than like the cursory, like,
Oh,
Alice
great.
in Wonderland.
Okay, great.
So is that the lore that's already there, or did you kind of have to hone in on that from the source material?
Yeah, so I would say some of those are from the source material, some are expansions, and some are kind of, some are whole, like new whole cloth, and some are reimaginings of the settings from the original books. So my Looking Glass Land is a little different from what is in the original book. So for a quick reference, like Wonderland is where Alice goes in the first book, and then Looking Glass Land is where Alice goes in the second book. But I think based on popular culture and a lot of the other imaginings, Wonderland kind of became this catch-all for both. So that's kind of how I've interpreted it here. One, because I think if you saw a book that just said Looking Glass Land, it may not have that same kind of recognition. And 2, I think it serves a different purpose here. So without kind of like revealing too much, like it's still a part of that kind of greater whole of Wonderland. Yeah.
Okay, and then Pandemonium, is that also like something that's been mentioned before, or did you kind of?
No, that's whole cloth, and that I won't get into, because I think that's a fun surprise for players and for game masters who are reading the book. Yeah.
And then within Wonderland, I don't know if we can, it's a spoiler alert, but there's kind of 3 layers to Wonderland.
Yeah, so because it is a dungeon crawl, the thing to consider is, or how I try to design it, is that you can kind of move around laterally within Wonderland, but as you go deeper and kind of like go downstairs to kind of literally go deeper into Wonderland, it gets more dangerous, or generally the threats become more dangerous. So for players who have run or played in dungeon crawls before, that's kind of generally the structure. So I wanted to kind of honor that, and also then kind of give players a sense that, like, oh, if we kind of continue to go further in, it is going to be more risky. And what is the risk or the reward for that? Because I think with that, like with greater threat, also comes like, better treasure, more lore and locations to explore. Like hopefully you kind of get more out of the setting, the deeper or the more willing you are to kind of risk exploration.
Cool. And then let's jump into the cast,
Sure.
which let's just kind of go through it. I I wish we had the Bone King first to talk about the three tongues, but I thought that was fantastic. And is that actually a thing from the books?
So the three tongues are inspired by, I don't remember if it's a poem at the beginning of Wonderland or if it's its own poem, but there are three children asking Lewis Carroll to tell them a story. So it's like kind of an inspiration and riff on that. So who these are is, I think, and I think like a lot of the book is still very much open to interpretation by the game master. So the backstory behind the three tongues is up to whomever is running the game. But yeah, the basics of it is that they are kind of three elderly kind of like women who are kind of like almost like witches, like they kind of have a coven component to them, but or they're stronger together, which I think maybe also lends into something that I kind of really strive for with Wonderland, which was because it is so combat focused, or because it was kind of exploring the conflict pillar of RPGs. I really wanted to make combat or explore as much kind of variety in combat as possible. So without making the stat blocks too complex, I tried to explore things like combined attacks where kind of like allies can work together to do something stronger, or like boss battles, and we saw some of this in Oz, but trying to explore that a bit further. So that way, yeah, so that way it feels like each conflict is different or unique. Like, or you could fight the same character multiple times and still be surprised by what sorts of things they can do.
And they speak on behalf of the Bone King, who is missing the bottom of his jaw, and so they
Yep.
speak on his behalf.
Yeah. The first level, I think the first level of Wonderland really kind of explores, I don't want to say explores the body, that maybe gives the wrong kind of connotation, but I think very much deals with kind of like the physical traits of the land. So the Bone King is missing his jaw. The birds are having trouble with their eggs. There's like a lot of kind of just like practical things within it. I will ask if we can skip Alice because I
Okay.
think that's a fun surprise.
Okay. That was I was very interested in it, so we'll have to talk about
Okay,
that
we can talk
offline.
off mic. I will say that for people playing in Wonderland, I think you will run into Alice. I think there's no question about that.
And so there's a picture of the Bone King with his missing
Mhm.
jaw. I thought that was a very evocative picture of him. We've got the caterpillar. So that is like for anybody that's seen the original Disney movie, the caterpillar. And I'm sure I don't know. It's probably shown up obviously in other things.
Yep.
The Tea Party characters. How did you approach that as far as like the fun of like designing and illustrating? And there's like because of the Disney movie, there's like a lot of kind of preconceived notions of what they should look like. And how did you kind of differentiate it and find your own voice in it?
Yeah, I try to. I don't know. With the visual depictions, I always try to add something that's, I don't want to say my own. Maybe that feels too, but like try to explore something new. So with the Tea Party, then it was very much like what is kind of expected from the Tea Party, or like what is expected from the Mad Hatter. So like the big hat, the kind of showy clothes, I think that's all important. Um, and with the hair, like kind of the March Hare has that kind of their own vibe, and the Dormouse is always sleeping. So those are kind of the elements that I really try to hold on to, or like with any of the cast illustrations, try to kind of keep in mind what do you expect, and then once that's done, then try to explore what is unexpected or like what is new. So with the Mad Hatter specifically, I forget what culture it is, but there's I should have written it down, but really kind of like performative tea pouring is the only way I can describe it, where it's like part of the show or part of having tea is pouring from very high into kind of like very small glasses. Like it's as much about the performance before drinking it than it is just kind of consuming the tea. So I tried to depict the Mad Hatter in that way, to kind of, I don't know, offer something new, and also admittedly to try to diversify the cast a bit. I think a lot of the original stories were like a singular culture or inspired by a singular culture. So try to add touches of that, or diversify a bit in the rest of the cast, where I can, and without I don't know, without kind of exploring it too. I don't want to say exploring it too much. What is it? Just like without kind of being too beholden to the source material.
And I have on the screen here now the checkers characters, and then like I'll just kind of preface that there's also like dominoes and
Right.
there's chess pieces and games, and the chessboard kind of play into the whole thing. When did that kind of click for you, where it's like, okay, this is like how I'm gonna like incorporate it all into the game?
I knew early on that I wanted the chessboard to kind of play, or the chess to play a role, like physical chessboards to play a role, and I knew that I wanted playing cards to play a kind of a role at the table. Because as much as these are settings that you can run kind of like virtually, I also really wanted there to be an element that you could play in the physical space, like, or that really kind of like lends itself to playing with a group of people in a physical space. So it was pretty early on that I knew that I wanted the chessboard and the deck of cards to factor in. And I should also explain how the cards play into things, because usually I use the chessboard as a way to show where players are on the map, even if it's not going from room to room. It is still very much like you've moved on from this area, so now you're kind of over here, to kind of also give them a sense of, oh, we have so much more to explore without really knowing kind of the details of the map. And then the playing cards are used for determining random encounters. So you can also still roll dice. Like there's still kind of, it's very clear you can still roll to kind of determine your random encounters. But I think it's also fun if players or the game master flips a card at the table and then figures out what that means. And then the players can try to start card counting, but I've also tried to set it up in a way that it's not that easy to kind of figure out how the system works, but there is a system. So it was very early on that I wanted that component, but it took a while to figure out exactly how it would work. Like the math behind how the playing cards factor into the random encounters took a lot of time, because again, I wanted it to not be a system that you could easily crack as a player, to recognize, oh, if they flip a diamond, then this happens. Even if they say, oh, well, they flip the 4 of diamonds, so this will happen. Like even if you flip that in different areas, different things happen. So it took a while for me to get there. But yeah, I would say that it was probably settled in probably halfway into the book, or maybe even a third way into the book, which these take usually like a year and a half for me to kind of get ready. So I guess we're looking at 4 months or so looking at cards and looking at the math and the probabilities and figuring out what makes the most sense.
That's the unhidden work of a game designer, where you're spending hours and hours just thinking of one little choice that dictates everything.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of things that I recognize folks may never actually pick up on, but for me is important to put in, so that way the one person who messages me or emails me and says, is this the reason this is like this? I can say, yes, absolutely. Like that was intentional, and I'm glad you found that.
Yeah,
So
the hidden hand guiding everything.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
the Children in Wells. I don't know if that's a spoiler, but I thought that was a fun little piece of the world, that there's always a child. Well, maybe I'm spoiling it.
No, that's
Tell me.
okay. I mean, like I'm happy to kind of reveal some things. Alice, I think I'm very guarded about, because it is such a reveal. And again, I feel like I'm really dangling a carrot. But so Children in Wells.
You have to buy
Um,
the book, people. I'm gonna have links in the
I appreciate that.
description.
So Children in Wells is kind of an allusion to kind of what was in one of the books, but also just a fun way to kind of get, I don't know, I always find kids in RPG settings add a creepy level to it, and kind of like a danger of like, oh, this doesn't feel like this should be here. So that was kind of like an immediate an immediate like, yes, I need to include this in the book. So, and they have their own kind of like purpose for being in Wonderland, or they kind of like serve their own kind of like role, which again, dungeon masters or game masters can kind of explore and change up without kind of breaking the setting. My whole approach with these books is they should have some kind of internal logic, but it's not so rigid that if you change an element, then everything else kind of falls by the wayside. Like, I really want it to be flexible, so that way, if you want to run a dark and gritty Wonderland, you absolutely can. If you want to run a Wonderland for 7-year-olds, it's still appropriate, and you may just like need to change some light things or figure out how death works, which I think I also mentioned at the beginning of the book. So it's flexible. The children in Wells are very much a part of that.
And then speaking of children in Wells, then you have the idea of 6 impossible things, Wells being one of those 6 things.
Right.
And I really like the fact that you kind of like highlighted these things, because to me, like, sometimes you're in a dungeon or world or whatever, and you come across these things, and these are like springboards into interesting, they're like enrichment. I keep using that word for like a zoo, like you throw enrichment in there, and like players pull levers and poke things and do things. And so I'll list the 6 impossible things, Wells being one of them, mirrors being one of them, and that seems like an obvious like Wonderland choice. Staircases, beds, hats, and paints. And so I don't know if they're spoiling, but I'm sure that within the first couple sessions, people kind of realize like that these all have intrinsic value of like oddity within the game.
Yeah, so the original line of kind of like 6 impossible things before breakfast, I think I might be misquoting it, but that comes from the books, but it's not really explained what those 6 impossible things are. So for me, thinking about what could those 6 things be, I really tried to consider the setting and then also the format. So some of those things like stairs and paints are leaning towards like the function of the dungeon, like verticality and so on. But actually, the paint is also really a kind of an allusion to kind of like painting the roses red and kind of the things that you would expect from Wonderland. So with those 6 things, trying to kind of find a balance of what would you be surprised by and what are you expecting? Like, I think when you walk around and explore a room a couple of times and then you come back and then there's just a mirror standing there, which my players have run into quite a bit, they instinctively know, oh, there's something strange about this. Like, this is not just something to ignore. Let's poke at it a bit. And that's always fun for me to kind of like set something up in the middle of the room just for them to kind of really kind of get curious about. So yeah, that's the kind of thinking behind those 6 things.
And then I'll bring the cast up again, and I'm gonna flip right to the Dreamins. Is that a term that was used, or did you come up with that?
No, that's my own. So without kind of getting too much into the lore behind them, I will say the idea behind Dreamins, we'll use the term Dreamins. The idea behind that was something that as a dungeon master or as a game master, you could, because I think functionally, that is an area where you can really create your own monsters. Like, it's essentially a whole section of the book where you can randomly roll or choose from tables to make your own monsters. And because Wonderland is such a combat or conflict focused setting, I really wanted there to be the opportunity to keep combat fun, as I was mentioning, with like, team attacks and combined or kind of like phases in combat. So having something where you can always generate new monsters was really important to me, because I think that also keeps it exciting or fresh as a player. Like, you're not always going to run into the same spiders and goblins and so on. You're going to run into creatures that you don't know. Oh, can we fight this? Like, it looks okay, but it might also be very deadly. And how do we kind of figure that out without losing the entire party? So that was kind of the role Dreamins play in this setting. So yes, that to answer your question is whole cloth me. It serves a specific purpose. within the setting, and ties in narratively as well. So that's the idea.
So here's the random eccentricities, and so you're never encountering the kind of same dreaming twice. And I
Right.
love the term dreaming. How has that not been used? That's like,
Do you know what? I think I asked myself the same question because I typed it into the internet to search, and I don't remember anything kind of really clearly coming up as like an intentional uh, kind of like use, or even as the kind of same ideas, kind of how I've used it. So I just lucked out. I don't know how to explain.
trademark Andrew Kolb.
Yeah, no, I'm happy. I would love if folks start designing their own dream-ins, independent of these tables, and start sharing them online or on. I know I have a Discord channel for these settings, so I think that'd be a great resource for folks to share.
And I have up on the screen now executioners from the cards. And as a kid, I have to say, I don't even know how old I was when I saw the original Disney movie of Alice in Wonderland. When the queen screams off with their head, like that scared the shit out of me as a kid. I was like thinking about that of like, oh, like that's kind of gross. But we have an executioner card.
Yeah, I think with all of the like exploring all of these settings, I think one thing I really value and try to kind of keep present in all of the books is that they can be lighthearted, but that there's still danger there. Like I think with Neverland, the pirates are still dangerous and trying to kill the children. Like that's very clear. And with Oz, like at the end of the day, the witches are like violent and kind of malicious entities. So I really try to kind of make these settings fun, but also still dangerous. Like I mean, my first player death, they started at a lower level, but my first player death was in Wonderland, simply because it's a dangerous setting, and it happened in a silly way, so that also feels appropriate for Wonderland. Yeah, things like the executioners, I try to kind of like reinforce that this is still a space where, you know what, someone could decide that you're going to be up for trial, or you're going to have to go to court. And if you lose this case, then you're losing your head.
And Glass Gorgon, is that like one of those Alice things that we need to skip past? Because it seems like
Loosely.
it's a big thing.
Yeah, I will say loosely. I think that's a fun surprise too. I guess what I can speak to is that the Looking Glass Land, while as a location is maybe not the same as what folks who have read the books would consider, I would say that I really tried to kind of flesh out a lot of the characters or creatures that kind of like live in that space, independent of kind of Wonderland. That plays a role in that. But good eye.
And just in general, like some of the characters are just kind of light and wispy, and they're kind of fun to just kind of throw in. Hedgehogs as an example of one, and it's just the Jabberwock. Obviously, that's like probably the most famous kind of Lewis Carroll kind of monster. Is there any kind of special intrinsic things about the Jabberwock?
Yeah, I think it's tricky because I think with so much history in TTRPGs and so much that's kind of come before this book, I recognize that there have also been a lot of interpretations of Wonderland specifically, because I think it lends itself well to dungeons and characters, and it's always fun playing against giant chess pieces. So I tried to kind of loosely look at existing stat blocks for the Jabberwock, or like previous interpretations. So that way I was kind of aware of what came before, but still trying to find something new, or because I was aware of what was coming before, then say, okay, what can be new about this? So with the Jabberwock, I lean more towards, because they live in I've never said this out loud, the Tulgi wood or the Tulgi wood. Like, I don't know if it's a hard or soft G. It's like a GIF situation, or GIF. So the Jabberwock is very much like almost like a wood dragon, I think is the best way to describe it. Like that's kind of like what was loosely in my mind when I was designing the stat block, like an elemental or kind of like spirit of the woods or the forest that it inhabits. So that was kind of my take. That was my take on it, or how I tried to kind of make something new for such an iconic character or creature.
And speaking of stat blocks, so this is compatible with 5e, and so all the stat blocks are kind of 5e or 6e or whatever we're calling it now. How did the OGL fiasco kind of play into like that fact that like both Oz and Neverland were 5e?
Great question. I don't, because these books take so long, I think that became an issue and then faded away while I was working on the project. So I think for me, at least, it was very much like when I reached out to the publisher, it was very much like, what do we do here? And it essentially became like a wait and see, and turned out to resolve itself. So I don't really have a big story of like, oh, I changed this 3 times and then it changed back. I just kind of said I'm going to keep working on this as is, and whatever happens will happen, and I will navigate that change when I need to.
Cool. And I really liked the character or the cast member Lilith, but I don't know if that's another one of those
Yeah,
like
I think we'll
skip
reserve her
past it.
for a read. Yeah.
Cool. And then there's Looking Glass Creatures. There's Lost Souls, and for those listening at home and not watching, that those are shoes.
Yep.
Lost Souls.
Yeah. I tried to use as much wordplay and instill as many puns as I could into the book as possible. One, because of the spirit of the source material, and two, because I think it makes it a more fun read. Like, I think there are elements of the stat blocks that players will never get to appreciate. Like, I tried to make this a book that is as enjoyable for someone to read, or as for the GM to read as possible, simply because of the wordplay. So some of the attacks are all like alphabetized, or all of the attacks are like the first 6 letters of the alphabet, or they're all wordplay on like different kind of elements. Like the footmen all have postage-based attacks, because they deliver mail. So things like that. Yeah.
And did you have a favorite character or illustration that you did here where you went, oh, okay, that was my most favorite thing to do, and it just kind of clicked?
Oh, good question. I will say the Cheshire Cat is one that I'm fond of, only because it is my own cat. So I really was happy that I captured his spirit.
What's his name?
Bernard. So Bernard was my model for the Cheshire Cat.
Bernard is now internet famous.
Yeah, and you can follow him on Instagram. He is a high energy cat. His handle is Cat is Neat. So yeah,
cool.
I think
I'll put a link into the
great,
description.
thank you. He will appreciate the boost in numbers. Yeah, I would say that Cheshire Cat is something I'm really proud of, and I think included in the book, in the back, there's kind of a sketchbook area where I show a lot of the rough work, or the kind of like lost illustrations that didn't make the cut. And in there, I will also say, you will see how many iterations of Alice it took before I landed on what I eventually landed on. So I think that is another one that once you flip through the book, and once you kind of go to that sketchbook at the back, you can see, oh, a lot of these look identical, but to me, they are all different, and all of them failed until that final one where it clicked and went, yes, this is exactly the kind of energy that I wanted the illustration to have.
And I don't think the PDF I have has these design notes, but you can see here. So here's all the iterations of Almost Alice, I think.
Yeah. So there's 3, 6, 9, 12. I think 12 or so.
And always my favorite part is kind of like seeing your process, which that's why I like the interviews here with you, is to like kind of get the behind the scenes, how you approached.
Thanks.
The design of it, and like look at the detail, people, like all the
math that goes on to it, and figuring out, making sure. Well, I mean, I will ask you, not to turn it around, but as someone who's now kind of like dipped further into the world of game design, how do you generally structure your early stages? Like, what do you try to do as kind of first steps?
Very similar. It's funny, as I have been making like little design sketches, and they look, what I would say is similar to yours, but not as pretty as yours. So I would never share mine, because they're like really, really rough.
No, I think that's great.
And so I looked at yours and I was like, yeah, that mine kind of looked like that too, and all the scribbles and all the notes, but I would never share mine because they look horrendous compared to yours. Like, yours are like almost finished products by the time you sketch it out, and mine are like really stick figures almost.
I will say though, I think with that first book was really unsure about whether or not I should include this, because I really was in my mind thinking, is anyone interested in this? Like, does anybody want to see the kind of like bad ideas or the kind of like rough kind of concepts before kind of getting to the finished product? And then I realized, oh, but I love seeing that from other artists. Like I think maybe I mentioned this last time. That all kind of came about because of having the kind of library editions of Hellboy, like the Hellboy comic,
Yeah.
and Mignola's notes in the back, and just like poring over the rough sketches and realizing, oh, I think if I like seeing this about other people's work, then hopefully they will like seeing it for me. So I will also reassure you that I would be really curious to see your rough work, because at the end of the day, everyone has a different approach and we can all kind of like learn from each other. And I think that rough experience or that kind of rough exploration is a good way to kind of see and find out where we kind of all differ in our approach.
And maybe this would be a good time to mention. I was going to wait till the end and mention your Domestika course, which, if you were unaware, Andrew has a Domestika course called Creative Gameplay Maps Illustrate a Fantasy World, and I actually didn't know about it. I kind of stumbled across it.
Oh, great.
I don't know where. Like, I was on Domestika, going like, I just like, I'm always learning, and so I stumbled across it. And I was like, I know Andrew, and so I saw the course for the maps. And what I told Andrew is, when I was making my little game, like when I was taking his course, I actually didn't end up producing a map, but I watched the videos, and I was like, in some of the tricks and tips that Andrew passed along as part of the process, you don't know how the sausage is made often, and you go, and to actually see Andrew go, okay, I put this on this layer of Photoshop, and I rotate the canvas. And for me, I had been using Photoshop for 20 years, and there were some things that I was like, why didn't I know that? Like, there was like, it was there the whole time, and until I saw Andrew do it, I was like, oh, okay, that's how you do it. And it's a great course, but everybody should check it out if you're interested in TTRP design, not only for maps, but just graphic design in general.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I feel the same way whenever I watch any other course or any other lesson about Photoshop, because it is such a robust piece of software. And there are so many moving parts that I don't always think about, or I had never considered. Like, a lot of the times it's, oh, I knew this was there and I knew that was there, but I had not connected the two of, if I put these together, then that will make this process easier. So I'm really glad that you kind of got some like technical kind of component out of the course too, because I tried to really kind of focus on how do we make map making fun. So I'm glad that once we kind of get into the kind of the grit of actually producing an illustration, that there's still a lot for you too, because that's great to hear. That's not what I was expecting.
So yeah, very inspiring. I'll put the link to the course below. So if you are an aspiring game designer, and the style of maps that Andrew makes are incredible, you'll see them in all the books, and
Oh,
kind of like,
yeah.
it's a fun. I mean, it really scratches my itch as mid-century modern kind
Right.
of vibes and stuff like that. So I really appreciate that. So okay, side note.
I think it's all
Side note.
relevant. Like, we're all talking about maps and game design and just design in general. I think it's still very much on the main road.
The other thing, and I'm gonna flip right to the land part here and just bring that up onto the
Great.
stage. So talking about the land and blocks. Now, when did you stumble across this? Has this been done before, or did you kind of come up with this for the chessboard concept and putting it all
I
together?
don't know. Like, I think this sort of thing has been done in like video games, because essentially what is happening is it's kind of almost like a roguelike, or like a procedurally generated map, with some intention. And I think the best way to describe it for folks who are just listening is that I've broken up Wonderland into a number of different areas, and those areas kind of map onto a grid, again using the chessboard, but that grid is kind of broken down into smaller blocks. So if you kind of think of like Tetris blocks, some are squares, some are long and thin, some are zigzags, some are like T's and crosses. And what that allows is for you to kind of fit these blocks together to make a bigger map in a way that either feels natural for you, or how I've been doing it is every couple of times the players go to Wonderland, it's a different map. Like, things are still there, and this castle is still on the first level, but it's in a totally different location, and it all still kind of fits together because of that kind of use of these blocks. So it wasn't what I had planned early on. I think I also talk about this in the sketchbook. I originally thought that I would map the entire board onto a chessboard, like just the 8x8 grid, and that was all of Wonderland. But it was feeling too rigid, with all of the locations being a single square. So once I kind of realized Tetris, like something about Tetris, and it's hard for me to explain how an idea like this, like it's not like it was slowly evolving. It's just one day I didn't have the idea, and then moments later I was just like, oh, this is it. Like it's Tetris. And then realizing then I can have blocks that are different sizes and shapes, and I can fit them together if I use a grid. That all just kind of, I don't know, snowballed off of that first word of kind of Tetris. So that was the idea, and that's where the idea of blocks comes from. So each of these different shapes is a different, well, they're all called blocks, and all these blocks fit together in different ways.
And did you ever like get stumped as making the blocks where you're like, oh, how did I fit this in? And the whole Tetris thing where you're like shift, 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 shift.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the biggest challenge, like what we're looking at on screen, is configurations that use different blocks on different levels to fit onto the chessboard. So also someone who's running Wonderland, if they don't want to map it onto a chessboard, you could have as many or as few blocks as you want. If you want to just run a single session and just have a 4x4 grid, or maybe that's too small, maybe like a 6x6 grid, maybe that's too big. Let's say 5x5 grid, then you can. But finding the configurations that mapped onto an 8x8 chessboard using the same blocks in different ways and in unique layouts took a lot of time. Yeah, that was a long process, a longer process
Yeah,
than the idea.
I was imagining it and going, oh, I think I probably would have given up halfway through. And this is too hard.
I know, but that's that tedium or whatever part of my brain that kind of pokes is the same part of my brain that is really inspired by Alice in Wonderland and also inspired by game design. Like it's, at the end of the day, it's a puzzle, and I really like making puzzles or solving puzzles. So that was, yeah, it took a lot of time, but I think for me that time went by quickly.
And then, right off the bat, the arrival and closets and cushions and a kind of a soft landing. We don't want to spoil that, but I'm going to just quickly flip through that. Like,
Sure.
and I'm looking at the pages now, like, and I don't know how many pages in total, but there are a ton of maps in here and descriptions and room descriptions. Like, if you have those blocks and then you basically have like all these different locations and random tables to go along with it, as all the other games have had. And the random tables are like, well thought out and really inspiring. There's like lots of nuggets or just sparks, like spark tables to go, okay, we're in the dance hall, let's do this. And so there's a ton of content that you can make just by flipping through the pages and going into a location. And it's like almost like a one shot for each room.
Yeah, so the problem I was trying to solve with this book, or at least for me, the fear of running a dungeon crawl was, oh, I don't remember where this room connects and how does this all fit together, and kind of feeling overwhelmed by, okay, I'm in this room, but the information I need is over here, and what page does that connect to? And oh, they found this in this room. So like a lot of flipping back and forth. So the solution of these blocks also helped me contain things. So I could say, okay, you're in the dance hall. This is a 2x1 block. So there's only two squares, like it's a small block. And they're closed by doors on all sides. So once they go into the next room, then I flip to that page and that block, and then all the information I need for wherever they go next is there. But while they're here in the dance floor or like in the dance hall, I have everything I need. I have random tables. I can figure out who's on stage and who's dancing. I can figure out what the refreshments are, and I can randomly generate that so it feels fresh each time. And that felt less overwhelming to say, okay, this dungeon crawl works in these kind of like small contained segments that can bleed over into each other. Like someone from the dance hall could follow your characters into the next room, and that could play out naturally. But it felt like I have all the information I need here on this spread for this area, and that's all I need. and that felt less overwhelming.
Well, it's great. Like I said, you can like almost like on the fly bring anybody into a game and just like let's roll.
Yeah, I hope so. I think Wonderland probably is, of the settings, the best suited to one shots or to randomly dropping people in, because you can have them just like start at the first block and explore for 3 or 4 hours, and then they need to get out of the dungeon by the end of the session. It really lends itself well to smaller play, or like shorter sessions or shorter campaigns. As much as, if you really have the time, like my players have barely gotten to the second level. Like they spend all their time on the first level just because of limited time, or that's just like what they're doing so far. And also low level, so they're also scared to kind of like go too deep and then die. So I think that's maybe also a factor. But yeah, I really think Wonderland would lend itself to like convention play, or like I said, one shots, or just like mini campaigns between maybe bigger campaigns.
And did you have a favorite area, just similar to the cast members? Did you have a favorite area that you went, oh, this is fun, I'm glad I thought of it?
Um, hmm. I don't know. I don't think I have a a specific area. I do like that the second level is much greener. So there's a lot more gardens. Like I like the idea of there being a lot of like hedges and so on. But actually, now that I say that, I think the hedge maze is my favorite location. It doesn't have a map because what we talked about earlier, but I really enjoyed populating that area with strange things that feel appropriate to find in a hedge maze.
And I took I had Pandemonium up on the screen, but we don't want to. That's a nice little secret thing. But anyways,
Cool.
just so you can kind of give a quick glimpse of it, don't pause the video or anything like that.
Do you know, if you're putting that much work into it, then you deserve to find all the secrets that are hidden there.
Yeah, it's great to see a nice finish to, as I mentioned, the trilogy. But as we come to the end of the interview here, did you have any ideas in mind? I mean, I'll just say this: I don't know for sure, but I was like, God, I think Winnie the Pooh and the 100 acre, or is a 1,000 acre wood? I don't even know.
Yeah, I think
Is
100
in
meters
public
wide.
is in public domain, and I imagine your map design skills would be perfect for that.
Yeah, I'd always planned these three, I think, based on what we're talking about, like the pillars of RPGs and kind of being settings that I'm really passionate about. I think next steps is really doing a lot of research to find something that clicks. Because I, like, to be completely honest, I would love to do more setting books, but also don't want to just make something just to make it. So I don't have another setting lined up just yet, but that could change tomorrow. I could read something or realize that something's in the public domain that I had not considered. So we'll see. Do you have any other suggestions? It sounded like you had a list.
No, that was
Oh,
the
okay.
one. Like I've
Okay.
been thinking about that for a while for you, and thinking like, boy, somebody should like totally make that, because I mean, all the different characters in the
Sure.
woods themselves, like I imagine what you could do with the woods.
Yeah, I think my goal is, each of these books has kind of solved its own problem for me, at least. Like, oh, I don't know how to run a hex crawl. I don't know how to run a point crawl. I don't know how to run a dungeon crawl. So what I think the next book will be, oh, I didn't know how to do this. Maybe it's not necessarily a system, but maybe it's high level play, or only playing with, I don't know. Yeah, the world is my oyster. So I think I'm really excited to kind of explore what comes next.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, you can get Wonderland. Look at that cover. Look at it. For those listening, you can see the shiny
It's
silver
shiny.
metallic. You can get that on November the 12th. There's links on Amazon for sure that you can get it there and get it in a quick order. And you can pre-order it there if you're listening to this on the Monday. But November the 12th, Tuesday, November the 12th, you can get this book in your hands. I'll have links in the description for where you can do that. And just want to say, Andrew, great end to the trilogy. I can't
Thank
wait to
you.
see what comes next. And thanks for inspiring me and all the work that you've been doing.
Oh, I appreciate it. And I want to reiterate, like, I would love to see your process work for making your games too. And I think that kind of goes out to everyone, anyone listening. I think sharing your process is only going to benefit the community.
Well, we'll see if I can work up the courage for that. But
Deal.
so, Andrew, thanks again for coming on the show, and best of luck in the future.
Thanks. It's always a pleasure to chat with you, Gary.